The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back with another week of podcasting excellence here on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt in the studio. Great to have you along with us. It is yet another Sunday night, and we are excited to bring you the best rock and metal music from July the 25th. And it was a really good week in music, a lot of really good stuff, and we're going to try to find the best of the best, and we will bring it to you on this episode of the Nerdcast Empire. It's great to have so many new followers. Big thanks to Chris for getting the word out. And we've got a lot of new people joining us and a lot of new subscribers on both Twitch and YouTube. So we definitely are very grateful for that. Thank you very much for joining us for this episode of the Hard Rock Empire. Joining me in studio, as always, is Mike. Mike, how's it going?
It's going. We are back for another week. We are rounding out the month of July finally. Decent week overall. Looking at the numbers, we had 8 artists on the list this week that have appeared on the list or on our list for prior weeks. Alice Cooper's new album with his original Alice Cooper band came out July 25th, The Revenge of Alice Cooper. Bruce Dickinson had a reworking of his 1994 album Balls to Picasso called More Balls to Picasso released, so that's cool. Fans of Deicide, we have a Roadrunner Years box set of theirs that came out. A couple interesting things, probably more in line with some of the other stuff we talk about on our different podcasts. Reigning Phoenix and Hasbro teamed up to bring us Cold Slither.
Yeah.
Which is a band based on a 1985 episode of G.I. Joe.
That's so random.
While age appropriate, I wasn't a huge G.I. Joe fan, more into Transformers back then, but I gave it a listen, and it's actually pretty solid. I didn't pick it this week, but always cool whenever different interests align. And kind of on that same note, the power metal band Alterium, who we actually picked last year for their new album that came out in 2024, they have an EP out this week called Storm Rage with a song of the same name inspired by a World of Warcraft character, Illidan Storm Rage. So that's kind of wild too. Other noteworthy albums we had, Enough's Enough, classic glam rock band, release a new album. Gwar has a new EP, The Return of Gorgor. Honeymoon Suite has their new album, Wake Me Up When the Sun Goes Down. And another rarities compilation from the band Sweet came out. So something for everybody this week.
There's a lot, and a lot of really good stuff this week. So I think when a little bit later on we get to the new music, I'll paste the playlist that Mike puts together every week in the chat on both YouTube and Twitch. And you can go through and pick your favorites for this week. And again, there's a lot to like. And, we talk about it all the time. Maybe if you're new to the podcast, there are certain types of metal that maybe aren't necessarily up my alley or up Mike's alley, but they do show up on these playlists. So if you're a fan of things that are maybe a little more toward the death metal side, a little more industrial, things like that, there's a good chance you're going to find something on Mike's playlist every week that's going to really speak to you. So definitely worth checking that out. A couple of things before we get into the podcast. We mentioned all of our new followers. A huge thanks to everybody who has jumped on board. We really appreciate it. And it's probably a good time, since we have a bunch of new people joining us. If you have not done so already, please join the Discord. I will be pasting the link for that in both chats. We post our stream schedule in there, which will be a little irregular the next couple of weeks because of my work schedule. But we definitely want you to go in there. And, of course, when we have our question of the week, we want to know what your answers are to the question of the week. So definitely jump in the Discord. A lot of really good stuff in there. And again, we do keep you updated on our stream schedule. We've got a lot of plans for the rest of the year. The hope is as my schedule kind of eases up, we're going to try to bring back our anime podcast. We've really enjoyed that. Obviously, we'll talk gaming news as well, and a lot of pro wrestling news, as Mike and I just watched AAA's Triple Mania last night, which turned out to be a really fun show last night.
Might be show of the year. I mean,
it might be just for the Omos Microman interaction alone.
Demon Ito was another great moment.
It was a good time. So we talk about a lot of stuff on this podcast. And we talk about it in the Discord as well. So please join our Discord. We'd really love to have you there. Stop on by. Just also a reminder, nerdcastempire.com, and of course our Twitch page, our YouTube page. That's where you can catch all of our VODs of previous podcasts. So make sure you stop on by. And again, as we always say, if you do nothing other than just stop in and say, hey, we would love to have you. That is absolutely plenty. We don't ask any more of anybody else. But we are working toward monetization on Twitch. We have all the buttons there now. Once we get to affiliate status, we'll actually be able to monetize, and then we can do some really cool things on the podcast once we kind of move to that direction. So that pretty much covers everything for all the new viewers. Let's jump into the news headlines, which is where we start every episode of the Hard Rock Empire. And this was a big one, so certainly no surprise that this will be the one news headline that we talk about this week. One of those good news, bad news sorts of things. We've got a little more final details on when Megadeth's new album is going to be out. It's going to be coming up in 2026, but also they're going to have their farewell tour, and that is obviously something that, I think, and Mike will let him give his thoughts in a moment, obviously, as our resident Megadeth fan, but and not that I'm not a fan as well, but, you look at their career and everything they've done, and we've talked a bit on the podcast about the fact they've been in the works with a new album that'll be coming out soon, and there would be a tour coming up after, but when you read the article from Blabbermouth, you kind of see that this is going to be it. Now, what that final date is, we don't necessarily know yet. I don't think there was an end date in the story as of yet. And I will, before we get into Mike's thoughts, always with metal bands and rock bands and musicians in general, always have to put an asterisk by any story that talks about a band ending. There are a few that have certainly held up to that, and there are others that decide that they want to keep doing it. So we're taking their word at face value, and I think, as Mike will explain, there's probably good reason to do so for a lot of reasons, but we'll let Mike jump in. Obviously, I don't think this news surprised you maybe as much as it might have surprised some other people, so curious about your thoughts about the whole thing.
Yeah, as someone who they're my favorite band, I'm not super upset about this. When you hear his quote, he says, "There's so many musicians that have come to the end of their career, whether accidental or intentional. Most of them don't get to go out on their own terms on top, and that's where I am in my life right now. I've traveled the world, made millions upon millions of fans, and the hardest part of all this is saying goodbye to them." You can't help but think that some of the more recent developments within the hard rock and metal world has influenced this decision. I think anyone in any line of work wants to say, "I'm done," when they're still able to enjoy being done.
Yeah.
I think for all the positive that came out of Ozzy's farewell concert and just the huge event it was, you can't help but look at that and say, ideally, wouldn't you want that to occur when Ozzy can perform an entire set and he's not in the kind of health state that he was in? It's not ideal. You're glad he made it to the finish line, but I don't think everyone wants that to be their finish line. I think you want a life to continue after your days of album recording and touring, and that kind of grueling schedule that I would think at Mustaine's age, there's just really no need to continue. When you look at his body of work over the years, with the exception of kind of that weird downtime when he suffered the arm injury, they've been consistent ever since, albeit with a rotating lineup, but he's got to work with some amazing musicians and release a crap ton of music. And there's no, like you mentioned, there's no real guarantee of when this is going to end. Even in the article, he kind of made the comment that let's enjoy these last few years, almost suggesting that the farewell tour could take multiple years. And if it's a world tour, that's certainly probably the case. But yeah, I just, a lot of great music. You've done enough, man. I think everyone deserves to retire and kind of enjoy life.
And I think, as much as, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more as they get closer to whatever that end date is, as much as you've mentioned, the rotating lineup and the fact there have been so many different people in and out, and, and fair or not fair, that's over the years attracted some criticism from former bandmates and things like that. And we've seen some of them have kind of gotten by it and things are good now. You saw Marty Friedman obviously playing with the band in Japan. Others probably haven't so much, and also kind of make that clear. But the one thing this band and specifically Dave Mustaine has really been since the very beginning is loyal to the fans, loyal to the people that have helped get this band on the Mount Rushmore of metal. And because of that, when you talk about a farewell tour that takes years, it would be hard to imagine that they won't tour everywhere. Like, if there are Megadeth fans somewhere in the world, they're gonna go there. They're gonna probably do a tour of Japan. They're gonna go to South America. They're gonna do a big European tour. Obviously, North America. I think, when you read that quote, the vibe you get off of it is anybody who wants to see us one more time, we want to make it somewhat convenient to you to give you that opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the story at this point is really just kind of the evolution of Dave Mustaine from the beginning to where he is now. Just he seems like a guy that maybe back in 1990 wasn't as appreciative of everything that his career has given him, and I think by 2025 he has a new perspective. I think will there always be a little bit of that chip on your shoulder, bitter feelings about maybe what happened to him in the 80s? Yeah, probably, but he seems like a dude who is ready to just be happy with the career he's had, and I think that's good to see.
I think it would be hard, and especially early in his career, not to feel that way. And then a lot of degrees, it is the reason they became so great. When you're motivated by something like what happened to him with Metallica, that's pretty strong motivation. And he was clearly a guy that was going to set out to prove people wrong, and mission accomplished. He's done that. They're right there alongside Metallica and Anthrax and Slayer and all the other great bands of that era that defined what heavy metal music was going to be here, not only just in the U.S. but worldwide. And I think with age, with all of us, comes perspective, and I think when you start getting closer to the end of your career, you can finally start to look back and appreciate it. It doesn't become this constant rat race, like I've got to make another album and it's got to be better than the last one. I've got to do all these things. You can kind of get to the point where it's like, you know what, we're going to make another album. We're going to have fun doing it, and then we're going to go out and tour it. And, it no longer becomes about the drive for you're always looking ahead to that next thing. Yeah. So you never get a chance to enjoy where you are. And if there are younger viewers listening to this podcast, I think, we've all learned that as we've gotten older is that, everybody's striving to do something amazing, whether it's, get this amazing job or, build a family or whatever your goals are in your life. And I think that's awesome. And I think everybody should be goal driven and goal oriented, but don't ever forget to take a moment to respect where you've come from and the achievements you've made, because I think sometimes for all of us, we get so wrapped up in where we want to go that we don't look and see where we are. And sometimes where we are is pretty awesome. And I feel like with Dave, he's finally gotten to the point where he can appreciate where he's at and not be so driven to get to that next thing.
Yeah, I would agree. Undoubtedly, just a tremendous career. Every band has had that album or two maybe where you're like, maybe that's a misstep. Maybe you aren't quite living up to what the fans are expecting. But, I think he course-corrected pretty well over the years, and some of the albums through the 2000s and 2010s are some of the best, whether it be System Has Failed, United Abominations, Dystopia, a lot of good stuff, Endgame. So, yeah, congratulations, and even though I've seen them a bunch of times, I'm certainly looking forward to seeing them one more time.
Yeah, for sure. No doubt about that. And when we get tour dates, we'll certainly talk about that on the podcast. And I'm really interested to see what this new album sounds like. What does an album sound like when it's probably your last one? How does that change how you go into the process of building an album? You get to relax and you really do something fun? Do you take some chances? Like, I'm really interested to see what that end product sounds like. It looks like maybe early 2026 before we get that new album.
Also curious, will there be any weird collaborations? I mean, The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead did have the collaboration with Ice-T, which I don't know if anyone was expecting. So, yeah, I'm excited for that. And then what's next? I mean, the guy could certainly still contribute to the industry in a number of ways that don't involve recording and touring with Megadeth.
Yeah, for sure. And, do the other band members get together and, sign with Frontiers Records and get some new lead singer and go out?
Also possible.
You never know. But, congratulations to Megadeth. They're not done yet. And we could be sitting here doing this podcast in 2 years talking about their farewell tour continuing on. But there is an end date in sight. What that date is, we don't know, but the end is coming close for one of the all-time greatest bands. So if they get in your area, you need to go see them, because you just don't know if it's the last chance you'll ever get to see this band live. So definitely check that out. That wraps up our news headlines for this week. Don't forget to check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. We'll be back with you next weekend. I'm not sure what time yet. It will either be a mid-afternoon Eastern time stream on Sunday, or it will be a Saturday night at 7 o'clock. We'll post on our social media. We'll post in the Discord when it's going to be. We got to figure that out as far as the schedule goes. kind of a lighter week in music next week, so we might go ahead and do the Saturday because I think we'll be able to get through everything a little quicker with it being a smaller group of albums next week. But stay tuned. The next 2 weekends are going to be a little off just because next weekend I've got broadcast, ESPN Plus, and NKU Women's Soccer, and then the following weekend we have a combination of a soccer broadcast, but Mike and I will also be coming back from MatsuriCon in Columbus. So we'll keep you updated. After that, we should be back to a pretty much regular schedule until probably mid-October, where we'll have another disruption with me going out of town for work. But again, join the Discord. You'll know when and where you will find the Nerdcast Empire. But it is time to get to the new music on the Nerdcast Empire. And of course, the new music as of today in this episode is July the 25th. And right now I am pasting the playlist that Mike creates into each chat. I definitely encourage you to check that out. And again, Mike puts this together after going through and downloading lists of all of the rock and metal albums that come out on a given date. Again, July 25th is that given date. And as much as he can, he tries to find a track off of all those new albums, puts them on a playlist. And then we go through them, and we each pick 2 new releases to spotlight on this podcast, and we bring those to you. But I thought this was you heard in the open, and if you didn't, you can definitely go back on the VOD and check it out. Mike ran down a list of probably 10 to 12 albums that we are not picking this week, but you definitely need to check out. There are definitely some good ones at the beginning of our podcast, so make sure you go back and check that out. But even with all the good stuff he already said that was on the list this week, we still have 4 more albums to talk about, and that's what we're going to do at this time. And as always, Mike will get things kicked off. So, Mike, get us started for the week of July the 25th.
Yeah, so for my first pick, I was just looking at the data, and it looks like this might actually be the first time we have the country of Chile represented.
Wow.
But this is the second full-length album from a Chilean heavy metal band. The band is Iron Spell, and the album is From the Grave.
Yeah, this is one of those ones, again, as happens sometimes when I hear an album and I see it, I just think, this is probably something Mike's going to pick because it feels like right up your alley. This is a really good album.
Yeah, I beyond enjoyed this. This is their first album since 2016's Electric Conjuring. The band formed in 2013 and have kind of been drip-feeding singles between their first 2 full albums, along with a compilation and a live album back in 2021. The current members of the band include Ivlock on bass, Fire Jack on guitars, Raven on guitars, Merciless Keiko on vocals, and FC Steelhammer on drums.
You know, when you pick a Chilean band, you think you're going to have to brush up on your high school Spanish, and then that's your band members.
Turns out, just a bunch of names of kids you went to school with, like Fire Jack and Merciless Keiko.
For sure.
I mean, who doesn't remember them? But yeah, when you see the album artwork to this, you think this is something you'd run into on the New Wave of Traditional Heavy Metal Albums channel on YouTube, which is probably on there. I didn't check. You also kind of get King Diamond vibes. You have this spooky ghost girl looking through a window from the outside of a house with a cemetery in the background. Just great imagery for what ultimately ends up being a really cool traditional metal album. Steel Drum, a reviewer for Angry Metal Guy, notes that the band's foundation is in new wave of British heavy metal, but they also incorporate American power metal and early speed metal into the sound, which I certainly agree with. He also mentions similarities in the track Whispers of Sorrow to Queensryche's Breaking the Silence. And if you go back and listen to it, you definitely get that, but just in general, every now and then you kind of get this older Queensryche vibe with these guys, which I'm on board with as well, obviously. You know, more and more bands in the classic metal scenes, all the metal scenes really, are going to be winding down over the coming years. I mean, we just had the story about Megadeth, but none of them are getting any younger. So this is a great time to find bands that are creating the kind of music you're into and are likely still going to have full careers ahead of them. I mean, these guys have been around for 12 years, 2 albums. They don't have a huge back catalog, so you can definitely get caught up, and I think it's a good time to find your new favorite bands, and these guys are certainly a band worth checking out. Standout tracks on the album include Curse of the Ushers, Released from Darkness, Devil King, Black, Hot, and Heavy, Children of the Night, and the track that I picked to listen to, the song Sorceress.
Check these guys out. This is Iron Spell joining us from Chile with their new album From the Grave. This is the second track off of this album, Sorceress. Let's listen to a little bit of that now. And it just decided to start at the beginning again. That's very interesting.
That's awkward.
So, thank you, YouTube Music, for your cooperation. We will get that queued back up. I don't know why it did that, but let's try it again. Yeah, I mean, this again, just listening to what I've heard of this album so far, it's really good, and I think you described it well. It definitely feels like a spin-off of new wave of British heavy metal, but again, a modern take on it, and that's what we find a lot out of this podcast is bands that are taking inspiration from that era, but not trying to rip it off either. They're really doing something new, and these guys seem to have found that right formula for that.
I think there are so many subgenres in this at this point and different eras where you can basically just create a list of what you want to incorporate into your sound. And yeah, at times it may come off sounding like something from 1982, but that's not always a bad thing either.
That's true. I'm definitely down for more music from that era. I think a lot of people are. So definitely worth checking out the full album for Iron Spell out on July the 25th, Mike's first pick of this week. As always, you have 2 picks each and every week. What do you have for pick number 2?
Yeah, so for pick number 2, I kind of went in a little bit of a different direction, more in the kind of punk-infused hard rock area of what we cover. This is the 5th studio album from an Ontario-based alternative hard rock band. They are the Dirty Nil, and the album is The Lash.
Yeah, this is another one that I marked to go back and listen to, and I saw you had picked it, and it's just, again, definitely different than the first band, but we get some punk-infused rock bands. There were a few of them, I think, on the list this week, and I think these guys definitely stood out as the best of that group.
Yeah, for sure, and it's something I do enjoy. It's maybe not as high on my list as like traditional metal, but I can still get into it. This is a band that formed in 2006 when Luke Bentham on vocals and guitar started playing music in high school with Kyle Fisher on drums. They've had a few bassists in the band over the years. Most recent was Sam Tomlinson, who just recently, I guess, left. He's listed from 2021 to 2025. They won a Juno Award for Breakthrough Group of the Year in 2017, so they have definitely got some traction over the years. The song I pulled for the playlist, the opening track on the album, Gallop of the Hounds, which we will hear later, caught my attention as just being like quality punk-infused hard rock, like I mentioned. Something I think can work in any era. When you hear it, yeah, it could have come out in 2001 or 2010 or yesterday. I think there's always kind of an appetite for this. Like, it's not overly complicated, but it's melodic. It's heavy in kind of a pop-ish way at times. But again, there's always a place for this.
Yep.
Standout tracks on the album include Fail in Time, That Don't Mean It Won't Sting, Spider Dream, They Won't Beat Us, Hero Narrative, and the track that I just mentioned earlier, the one we're going to listen to, Gallop of the Hounds.
Check these guys out. It's the Dirty Nil with their new album, The Lash. This is the opening track off of that album, assuming YouTube Music will cooperate. We're going to listen to a little bit of that now.
I know you can hear me now while you're running out of town from the pitchforks of the crowd and the gallop of the hounds. In vain, I asked for mercy at your feet, but you never spared the lash. Chop, chop, run fast.
Yeah, I think, the one thing about punk music to me is the stuff that I really like has a little bit more of a melodic sound to it. Punk is definitely one of those areas where you can get into vocalists that are sometimes difficult to listen to. They're just a lot harder, or there's not as much melody there. And these guys found that right balance between the punk sensibilities of the song, but also a singer who can just sing. And I think that's what, to me, at least picking music for me, that's what elevates that to something that I would want to put on my playlist.
Yeah, sometimes I think the punk genre has this tendency to have vocalists who have really whiny, annoying voices. It's kind of the difference where I really like Bad Religion, but I've never been able to get into a band like NoFX.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't like his voice. It annoys me. You know, I know a lot of people would disagree, but that's my taste in music, I suppose, and that's why I think something like this works.
Yeah, and if you're a fan of that type of punk music, definitely check out the Dirty Nil, Mike's second pick this week. As always, I have 2 picks as well, and Mike mentioned a little bit of it in the open, but this was a pretty strong week for melodic rock. There were several choices on the list. Frontiers had a band. We saw Pride and Joy coming in with a couple of options, even I think an independent one that was kind of out of nowhere. Yeah. In the effort to not pick 2 melodic bands, so I went with just one, and I went with what they term as an international melodic rock band. This is Hearts on Fire with Signs and Wonders. You know, it was kind of hard splitting hairs between the melodic rock bands this week, but the one thing that set these guys aside, to me, is the fact that sometimes with melodic rock, you get a whole album where everything kind of sounds the same. It sounds like it's just the same song, and they just change the lyrics, and they make new songs. And this did not feel that way. This is their second full-length album, 7 years after their debut, Call of Destiny. So, they're 7 years, a lot of things can change. Let's bring in a new lead singer. And they brought in Mark Bowles on vocals, of course, former Yngwie Malmsteen lead vocalist. And, he absolutely knocks it out of the park here. Also joining him in this band are John Funes on guitars, Joel Mejia on drums, Eric Ragno on keyboards, and Dennis Ward coming in from Chimera to play bass and to mix and master this release as well. So, again, I thought this had the most variety. Didn't feel like every song was the same. Bowles' vocals, I think, took this to a different level. I didn't realize he was 66 years old. He sure doesn't sound like it. If you listen to this album, you would have never guessed that this guy's pushing 70 because he still sounds amazing. Also didn't know he was an Ohio guy. He's from Youngstown.
No,
so,
I didn't know that either.
But he's still absolutely getting it done. I mentioned Dennis Ward, who mixed and mastered this in addition to guesting on bass. This, I thought, was just a really, really good release if you're a fan of melodic rock like I am. This one should definitely be on your list this week. Standout tracks include Lights and Shadows, 11th Hour, World Torn in Two, and the song we're going to listen to on the podcast, Signs in the Sky. Let's check these guys out. This is Hearts on Fire with their new release, Signs and Wonders. This is the opening track off of that album, Signs in the Sky. Let's listen to a little bit of that now.
Look for the signs in the sky. Run to your hiding place. Look for the signs in the sky. The stars are falling tonight. Signs in the sky. Ooh, yeah. We're close to the end.
But yeah, I was impressed again with the vocals. The music was really good. You can definitely hear there's a lot of instrumentation going on in this, so it definitely has a full sound. But overall, I thought of the melodic rock albums this week, I thought this one was a little bit above everything else. I really did enjoy it. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought this sounded good. And to your point, I do think there were quite a few on the list this week that had potential. So I'm not surprised to at least see one of them make the cut. Also, you better go big when your band is named after the classic John Cafferty song from Rocky IV, which is just a tremendous movie and soundtrack. Also didn't know that song Hearts on Fire by John Cafferty was written by Vince DiCola, who did the score for the Transformers 1986 animated movie.
Honestly, makes a lot of sense when you think about it. The songs definitely feel
I never thought about it, but yeah, it sounds... If you stripped away the vocals, it would sound like it was from Transformers. So.
Yeah, for sure. But definitely check those guys out. Really enjoyed this album. First one in 7 years, and they come out swinging with Hearts on Fire, their new release out on July the 25th. As always, I have 2 picks as well, and as I mentioned, I wanted to try to avoid 2 melodic rock picks. Some weeks that's unavoidable if it's just really good stuff. But this week instead, I moved to Germany with this heavy metal band that is independent. This is Tomb of Giants with their new EP, Holding the Flame. You know, always interesting to see these bands that are not signed to labels, and especially ones that have been around. These guys have been around since 2013. They have 2 full-length albums. The last one was 2023's Legacy of the Sword. As I said, they're independent, but honestly, if they're going to put out stuff like this, I can't imagine that's going to last very long unless that's by their choice. Somebody probably ought to scoop these guys up because this was a really good effort. Dead Rhetoric, their review summed up this EP best, said, immediate evidence suggests based on the logo and cover art alone that we are dealing with a back-to-the-roots traditional heavy metal band, and that's what you'll get straight from with the power hooks, twin guitar lines, and soaring vocals. Yeah, that absolutely described kind of what this band was going for. Of the 4 songs on this EP, 2 of them were actually reworked from their 2017 debut, Midnight Devil and When Destiny Calls, in what they were calling Renewed Force, so maybe a little harder. This band is centered around frontman Kai Roarside, guitarist Oliver Nienhusen, and Yannick Mozinski, bassist Daniel Melchior, and drummer Mirko Nienhusen. Hopefully I got some of those close to correct. On their website, they mentioned combining the styles of Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, and Overkill, so you kind of see what genre of music they are going for. It's definitely a throwback to the 80s. Again, I hope this is something that will get these guys signed onto a major label, and maybe we'll see another full album from these guys soon. Standout tracks, only 4 tracks, so listen to the whole thing. But the song we're going to listen to on the podcast is The Flame. We'll listen to these guys now. This is Tomb of Giants with their new EP, Holding the Flame. This is the opening track off of that album. It is entitled The Flame. Let's listen to a little bit of that now.
Live life now, as loud as you can. Running free, aim for the sky, never kneel. Reach for the stars, running free. Live for your dreams and believe, 'cause you keep on holding the flame.
I think the one thing I wanted to really highlight in that clip is the dueling guitars after the chorus there. There's definitely, and if you have headphones on when you listen to this podcast, hopefully you got a chance to hear really that left and right channel, because whoever mixed this clearly knew what they were doing. They're split out really nicely, and it really gives you that good sound in your ears that really kind of makes that stand out. But overall, excited to see what these guys do going forward. Mike, your thoughts on these guys?
Yeah, this was a really strong EP. You don't always hear Overkill being name dropped as an inspiration.
Yeah.
You hear Iron Maiden and Judas Priest ad nauseum, but you don't hear Overkill that often, and that's a shame because they were definitely, as far as early 80s thrash goes, they kind of had their own thing going on, and just saw them live a few months back, and they were still really good. I do kind of wonder when you see these bands who aren't signed, and we unfortunately don't know kind of the business end of that, like what these deals with labels like Frontiers and Pride and Joy, what those actually even look like, and are there instances where it just makes sense to not sign on?
Yeah, that's a great point. Of course, we've talked about a lot on this podcast. A lot of these bands that either aren't on labels or they're on smaller labels, you'll see them on Bandcamp. So a lot of their stuff is, you can get basically direct from the band. In many cases, Mike has mentioned ordering albums or vinyl and getting special gifts or autographs or notes from the band. So, there could be cases where potentially being independent to a certain level, I'm sure, there's really no advantage to being on a label for some of these bands. And it brings up the point we talk about on the podcast all the time. I know we have not a lot of new people listening, so I always want to give this plug. If you hear something you like, buy the album, buy the vinyl, see them on tour, buy some merch, like whatever you can do to support these bands, because we're very fortunate to get to listen to all this great music every week, but it's maybe a tougher time than ever to be in the music industry, especially at this level, the bands we talk about. So anything you can do to give them some support is awesome, and it's going to allow them to continue to put out this awesome music that again, as we've said many times before, and I know for some people who maybe listen all the time, this is repeat, but for new people, when we started this podcast 2 years ago, had no idea this music was out there.
Not to the degree it is.
No.
It's amazing.
And so it's great to see these bands, and it's great to talk about them, and it's great to support them however we can and however you can, just so that we get more of this music and we can keep doing this thing as that we've done for now 78 episodes here on the Hard Rock Empire. So
Yeah, and a lot of them have, like you mentioned, stuff that you can buy from them directly, but they'll do kind of limited prints of their albums on vinyl, like specialty vinyl, different colors, different bundles you can buy with that, and even deals on like their digital catalog. If you're more into collecting music digitally, you can get really good deals on Bandcamp. Every like month or so, there'll be a Friday called Bandcamp Friday where they'll get all of the proceeds from whatever you buy on Bandcamp. Like the actual Bandcamp app won't take any of the revenue from it. So that's always something to look out for. But yeah, there's just a lot of really cool music. And, you know, since me at my age, I wasn't around in the early 80s to buy that stuff, I feel like this is a chance where I can get in on kind of the resurgence of some of these styles of music and get in kind of on the ground floor of that. And I think that's really cool.
yeah, absolutely. So definitely want to pitch that. But yeah, again, check out Tomb of Giants. Really enjoyed that. My second pick this week. It's time to jump into the vault where Mike and I will each give you a classic album to check out. Mike is just about through his vault for a third time, and he's been going each week and picking on a different letter. And of course, we are up to the letter X this week, and maybe a couple of options in the letter X, but you certainly got a good one this week. What do you have for us in the vault?
That is the problem. There really aren't many options in the letter X. When I first set out to do the vault the first time around, when I was picking things from my actual collection, when I got to the letter X, or a few weeks removed from that, I noticed a problem, and that was that I didn't own any albums from bands starting with the letter X. None at all. So a few weeks before I had to have it, I ordered X Japan's compilation from 2014. Glad I did, because it turned out to be really awesome. Then for those who remember, the second time through the alphabet, I basically went to the Wikipedia list of glam bands and did one for every letter. When I got to the letter X that time, I found the self-titled album from the band XYZ, which was pretty good, so went that route. But here we are again, going through my collection, getting to the letter X, and now I own one album with the letter X. So I had to stretch and reach and try to figure out something to do. And turned out there was a band that I've seen live who begins with the letter X and kind of fits the mold of what we talk about here. So I gave their album a listen. And that being said, my choice this week is the band Xandria and their 2014 album Sacrificium.
I'm sure that it's going to come up again when I get to my vault pick, but I was trying to think in my head when I saw Xandria live, because it is probably way longer ago than I actually remember.
I did a little research to try to figure it out through like Setlist FM, and I think it was probably around this time, 2014.
Okay.
That's my guess.
Okay, so it hasn't been as long ago as maybe I would have thought.
Yeah, because if I remember right, it was them, Delane, and Sonata Arctica.
Yeah.
And it was, I think, the first time we saw Sonata Arctica. So, and that's actually kind of important, because Xandria has had quite a few lead singers over the years. So when you saw them and what album they were touring on, probably could have had some impact on the sound they had and the overall temperament of the band themselves. Anyway, so this album, according to Wikipedia, in Latin, the word sacrificium means the performance of an act that renders something sacred. Cool enough.
Yeah.
Before this album was recorded, the band parted ways with their singer from the past 3 years, Manuela Crawler, and brought in Dutch singer Diane van Giersbergen. There's no question she can definitely handle the symphonic nature of the band's sound. She sounds like an opera singer, and this album has a huge over-the-top symphonic metal vibe to it. The band itself started as a project of Marco Hubaum in 1994. And to look at their band member timeline from that point, I think project is probably a good way to put it, because you can't help but think it's just kind of his thing, and members kind of filter in and out. By the time they released their first album, they were already on their second vocalist, fourth lead guitarist, second bassist, and drummer. So, they'd already kind of had some people filter in and out before they put something down on CD. The band's also had some turmoil with former members, particularly lead vocalists over the years. The vocalist for their first album, Lisa Middlehove, left the band in 2008, citing personal reasons and discomfort at being the band's frontwoman. Oh. She was initially replaced by Kirsten Bischoff, who left after a short time to pursue a different career. Middlehove stepped in temporarily for some tour dates, but was ultimately she didn't rejoin the band. She was replaced by Manuela Crawler, who I mentioned. She joined the band, stayed 3 years, then left as well. She was replaced by Diane von Giersbergen in 2013. In 2017, Giersbergen left the band, stating that she received pressure to perform from Xandria's management in the band while not being physically able to do so. After that, former vocalist Manuela Crawler came forward saying she left for the same reason. She just didn't feel comfortable coming forward with it at the time. After that, Lisa Middlehove, the singer before that, said that not only she, but also her ex-husband, who she was married to and was the bassist in the band at the time, both left under negative circumstances too. So... Turns out they've kind of had a history of maybe having some issues with band members. And again, when you're someone's project, I can see where maybe heads would butt. And, maybe it's not always easy to get along with everybody that you're working with. That being said, the band's still around and performing with different members. So hopefully things are going well for them. Hopefully there's no more turmoil. All that being said, the album Sacrificium is a really solid symphonic metal album, if that's your thing. Sometimes it is for me, sometimes it's not. Got to be in a certain mood for that just beyond over-the-top presentation. Standout tracks on the album include the title track, Sacrificium, Nightfall, Stardust, Betrayer, Until the End, and Our Neverworld. If you're really looking for a band that starts with the letter X, they're not a bad option. Probably better to listen to them than play with them. So that's where we are. Not a bad album.
Yeah, obviously, we've talked about it before, and I think, it's kind of fitting that this bookend on an episode where we're talking about Megadeth, because it's been a very different situation there in that the front man is also the guy who's the driving force of the band. Here's a case where they were kind of known as female-fronted bands. Yeah. So, when they have success, it's the female-fronted part of that female-fronted band that tends to get the attention, and if it's a project that's not her project, that certainly can cause hard feelings on top of whatever else was going on at the time. And, you talk about kind of being in that mood, and I 100% agree with that. We listen to, so many bands every week, and there are days where we get something like that on the playlist, and I think that's really good. And then there are other times I just can't listen to another operatic,
Give me a power trio rock band.
Yeah, and
I don't need the bombast of this.
I will say that they were a pretty good fit on a bill with Delane and Sonata Arctica,
absolutely.
Because Delane is probably a step harder, I think, at least if I remember correctly. Still some over-the-topness, but maybe not quite to the same degree as Xandria. And
then it felt like they were writing more mainstream-sounding music than Xandria did. That was my take.
Yeah, and then you had Sonata Arctica, obviously. We've talked about a lot, and we'll be seeing again coming up next month, believe it or not. We'll be seeing them in Sonata and Symphony X in Cleveland coming up next month. So
maybe we'll hear some new Symphony X. Their new album's going to be coming out at some point.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about Symphony X next week as well. So there's a little teaser to my vault pick next week. But they were fine. And would I go see them as a headliner based on what I remember from that concert? Probably not. But if they were opening again for Sonata Arctica or somebody like that, I would 100% go. They were not bad. And if you're a fan of that type of music, I can definitely recommend them. It's just not always my favorite type of this type of music as far as the over the top melodies and things like that. So your mileage may vary, as we often say. But
if anyone out there knows of any other really good bands that begin with the letter X, throw them out there.
Drop in the Discord, drop in the chat. Let us know. At some point, I know Mike's getting ready to start a new gimmick on his vault coming up. But
we'll get away from the alphabet for a while.
Probably a good call.
Now that PBS isn't being funded, I just don't feel like I need to teach people the alphabet.
That's true. You just make up whatever letters you want, I guess. But yeah, we'll let Mike talk about that in a couple weeks. We still got Y and Z to go, so we'll talk about that change to Mike's vault coming up in a couple weeks. So make sure you stick around for that. I am, of course, going through the Frontiers Records list on Wikipedia, and we're spending 2 weeks on each letter. First week, I pick a band. The second week, the randomizer picks a band, and it works out well that it is somebody who I would have certainly wanted to check out his solo work. This is an album, the second and final, as far as I can tell, solo album from Kelly Keagy, longtime drummer of Night Ranger. This is the album I'm Alive. So I also looked up when we saw Night Ranger. We saw them twice in the year 2000. 25 years ago.
I wouldn't have guessed it was that long ago.
Saw them at the Phrase Pavilion on June the 3rd, and then at the Cincinnati Chili Fest on July the 19th. Saw them with Starship on June the 3rd, and then I think they were the headliners at the Chili Fest, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I saw them at the Chili Fest,
Yeah,
which
that's right.
was fine.
Yeah, that's right. You were with me on the second date, and they were good. I mean, I feel like the Chili Fest show was fine. I feel like we might have met Kelly Keagy's brother at that event because we were talking about him, and some guy who looked a lot like him turned around and talked to us. But 25 years ago, we saw Night Ranger, and I would love to see them again because they're really good. But this is his solo stuff here. He released this album in 2007 on Frontiers Records. Featured a frequent topic of this podcast, Jim Peterick. Also, Whitesnake and Winger guitarist Reb Beach. And Michael Lardy, who spent time in Great White and Night Ranger in addition to working on the production and engineering side of this. And a big thanks to Cad Kuhn for subscribing with Prime. Thank you very much. We really appreciate that.
Awesome.
Keagy, for those who maybe don't know his time in Night Ranger, and he continues in Night Ranger, that is something that can continued on. He sang a lot of the ballad hits of the band, including Sister Christian and Sentimental Street, also the vocals for Sing Me Away, which is a really good song as well. He helped form Night Ranger with Jack Blades and Brad Gillis back in 1979. So then it's just, you start putting the math together. It's like, they were a band for 21 years before we saw them, and that was 25 years ago. So they're closing in on 50 years, which is really awesome. This is the second of his two solo albums. He continued with Night Ranger. He continues with Night Ranger, who released their 13th studio album in 2021, ATBPO, And the Band Played On, which, of course, was released on Frontiers Records. Don't think that's any shock. We may have to check that out when we get to the ends coming up and see how that sounds. Overall, I think it's exactly what you would expect out of Night Ranger sounding release. This is 2007, so obviously just a few years after we saw the band. Kelly Keagy obviously still sounds great. You definitely hear the Night Ranger type sounds in his voice, and honestly, it's a really solid album. It's definitely worth picking up if you're a fan of Night Ranger. Standout tracks include Blink of an Eye, Life Worth Remembering, World Before You and After, and Call in Another Day. Yeah, it's good, as I would expect, as most of these Frontiers vault picks have been. And, as a fan of Night Ranger, they're kind of another one of those bands that I would like to see at least one more time before they hang it up. They're really talented, and it's great that they're continuing on.
Yeah, you mentioned Reb Beach, and I feel like he's kind of still an underrated guitarist. I don't think people give him the credit he deserves. Like, I know a lot of people riff on Winger just in general, but some of his guitar work in Winger was fantastic. He also took over for George Lynch and Dokken in the late 90s. The album Erase the Slate came out with him on guitar, which for kind of post-relevance Dokken was a pretty good album. But yeah, I'm not surprised this is good. Like, too many good people were working on it. What can you say?
Yeah, so definitely check it out. Next week, I'll be moving on to the letter L, and I already have my two picks for the letter L. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking tangent to Symphony X next week. We're going to be talking about a band called Level 10 next week. That's your preview of their one and only album release, which is often the case with these Frontiers bands, is they get a great group of people together, they do one album, and then they just all go their separate ways. But when I talk about the guys that are in that band, that's not going to surprise you because they're all involved in about 50 different projects. So excited to check that out coming up next week. That is the vault for this week. It's time to move on to the Power Trio, our hard rock hat trick. It's our question of the week. And of course, we invite you to join our Discord, which is pinned in both chats, and let us know your answers to the question of the week. And of course, you can always, if you're with us live, you can always chat those answers right in the chat as well. So we definitely appreciate that. This week's question, as often when I haven't come up with a question and it gets later in the week, there's something that has happened that week in music that kind of inspired me. And, ever since I got my new car, I've been listening to a lot of YouTube music in my car because I can hook my phone up to my car. So I'm getting because I also listen to all these podcast songs on YouTube music, I'm just getting the most eclectic mix of music. But the song came up, and I'll mention exactly what it was when we get to my picks. It just made me think, we talk a lot about great bands, and we talk about their albums and their songs, but, we wanted to talk a little bit about solo acts, either people who made it with a big band and then decided to go off on their own, or people who never really had that big band. Maybe they always did their own thing. We want to talk about our three of our favorite releases from solo acts. And I think, again, this is it can end up being a very broad topic. And the other thing, too, is we kind of discussed in the Discord, is there's a lot of room for interpretation when it comes to solo acts here, because there are bands. I mean, you look at Alice Cooper's a great example, because Alice Cooper is the front man of Alice Cooper.
It's a band and a person.
It's a band and a person. Ozzy Osbourne. There's, and kind of our general rule, and you can follow this as well or not, is that we really don't have any kind of rules. If you have a strong case that your pick should fall into this category, then knock yourself out. We will not. We do not have like a home office somewhere that makes final rulings on all these sorts of things. We just kind of roll with it. So I know Chris has got his picks. I don't believe we got anything from Shane this week.
We did not. I think I've tapped out his music fandom for a while, so we'll see how that goes.
We'll check back in with him a little later on at some point. But I know Chris has got some great picks. What has Chris got for us this week for his solo choices?
Yeah, so number one for Chris, and this goes back to the debate on, is Alice Cooper a band or a person, because it's an album from the Alice Cooper Band.
Yeah.
1973's Billion Dollar Babies. Classic, obviously, with the title track. You also got No More Mr. Nice Guy. Can't go wrong with that. Number two, we have Rob Zombie and his 2001 album, The Sinister Urge. We talked about that a little on the Discord. I think that's probably his most complete effort. I like both the Hellbilly Deluxe albums, but I almost feel like you could take both of those, grab the good songs off of each,
one album,
make one really good Hellbilly Deluxe album. And he's released a lot since then that, there might be a track or two that I remember, but I haven't really kept up with his career all that closely since Hellbilly Deluxe 2.
Thank you. Twin Mom Shan with Taylor Swift, and Taylor Swift. You and Chris can fight about that on or even in chat if you would like. But what's number three for Chris?
So number three, let me go back to the Discord over here. Oh, Metalocalypse, the Death album from 2007, that being the work of Brendan Small, who... Metalocalypse, his second best piece of work. Home movies will always be superior to Metalocalypse. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules, but Home movies was legendary. But yeah, good choices. I think he kind of had... Potentially, he could have picked some Marilyn Manson or Nine Inch Nails, but I like the three he went with.
And, Metalocalypse is a really good example of a band that is a solo project. And, we come across that on the podcast all the time, where we will have a band and then we dig into it and it's one person that basically does the whole thing. And to me, that's a solo project. If you're a one man or one woman band that basically plays all the instruments, writes all the lyrics, you're a solo project. Yeah. So I think that's where that fits in there. So all great choices from Chris, for sure. You have choices as well. What do you got for us on the vault?
Yeah, and kind of going back to the distinction between the two, we brought up Ozzy in the Discord as well, because that was a solo act, but it's hard to not think of him without thinking about whatever virtuoso guitarist he had playing with him at that point in time, whether it's Randy Rhoads, Jake E. Lee, Zakk Wylde. Ultimately, I assume that Ozzy's getting all the royalties, or the vast majority of them, so still solo artist, but, dude worked with some really good talent, gotta say.
For sure. And again, that's where whatever you want to say the rules are, like if you want to be insistent that Ozzy is a solo act, that's completely your right to do that. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of guys that made that solo act pretty successful.
Yeah, absolutely. So going into my picks, I also picked Alice Cooper.
Okay, fair enough.
Different era Alice Cooper. When you look at his run as a solo artist, he had so many different kind of sounds and eras throughout the years. I think one that's kind of underrated is when he kind of went into the nu metal stuff. 2001's Brutal Planet. Definitely like him trying to kind of sound like Marilyn Manson. You know, maybe not the most popular, but I enjoyed it. Tracks like Sanctuary, It's Little Things, Cold Machines, all really great tunes, and just goes to show you Alice Cooper, like Ozzy, has always been able to reinvent himself and make do.
I wonder, and I'm curious, and if our listeners have thoughts on this, please either share them in the chat or share them in the Discord. Where is the line between reinventing yourself and selling out?
There's no line. It's the exact same thing. Let's be real.
Because it's hard to blame somebody for trying to keep up with the times, especially somebody that's been around for a long time, because as we've talked about on this podcast extensively, a lot of the music we like that we pick every week went out of favor in the mainstream in 1985, 1990, 1995. So it's like, how do you blame an artist like Alice Cooper for trying to stay on the radio, trying to stay current? And at the same time, it's definitely in some degree selling out because you're trying to continue to have big albums.
And I think especially in like Alice Cooper's case, I think Aerosmith's another one where they specifically brought in writers to get them hits throughout the 80s. So probably not in 2001 so much, but you know, that is very much selling out.
And I love Alice Cooper. That is not a criticism. It's just
love
an
his stuff in the 80s. Like 80s and early 90s, Alice Cooper is tremendous.
Yeah.
But yeah, you also, if you don't want to be super cynical, you also can look at it from the perspective of they're artists who are probably being influenced by the stuff that they're hearing at that moment in time. So if Alice Cooper's touring with Manson, he's getting a steady diet of Marilyn Manson sounding music. It's like he's hearing Beautiful People every night. That's going to maybe influence what your next album is going to sound like. That's just natural.
Chris bringing up Load by Metallica, which we've talked about quite a bit on the podcast, is that, we sell out. I mean, it's the quote from,
Jason Newsted. Every seat in the house, everywhere we play.
And I love Load. And there are some Metallica fans that probably still to this day will not put that album on because they feel like you basically have abandoned everything that came before that. And to me, it's awesome. So
the people I feel bad for were the people that thought the Black Album was the sellout album.
Yeah.
Like you thought Metallica had already leaned heavy into commercial music, not even realizing what you were going to be getting in later in the 90s. And God forbid 2003 when Saint Anger came out.
Yeah, well, I wish he had, honestly. But sometimes you turn the dial too far. Sometimes, and we talked about Spinal Tap last week or the week before. Sometimes you go all the way to 11, and maybe you should dial it back a little bit. And I feel like they eventually did that. But a great example by Chris.
Yeah, and I think, too, and I try to keep this in mind when you talk about bands over that long a time, there's no rule saying you have to be a fan of their entire catalog.
Right.
Just as there's no rule saying they have to write music to please you.
Yep.
It works both ways. You can, I imagine there were a lot of people who hated when Rush started throwing a bunch of synths in their stuff.
Yeah. Rush is kind of a band that took a lot of different twists and turns to try to find what was current and find the things that they loved and really, whatever the new technology was, let's use this.
And I don't know if it's just part of being a more progressive band where your fan base is a little more accepting to you trying new things.
Yeah.
Because I feel like they didn't get quite the backlash. I'm sure there are people that are like, why doesn't this sound like 2112? But I feel like they didn't get it quite as bad as like your Metallicas did.
Yeah, probably because the stuff they tried wasn't necessarily always mainstream. It was like, this is weirder than the last thing you did, but it's different, and clearly you're trying something different. You didn't do it to get a song on the radio necessarily, so I think maybe as long as you're not commercializing it, I guess you get away with it to some degree.
Sure, but, I could see that being the case.
Anyway, back to your picks.
So number 2, I was kind of torn on which album I wanted to go with for this one, but what I ended up going with was Dio's 1984 album, The Last in Line.
Yeah, that one definitely crossed my mind. I figured somebody would pick Dio because it's Dio, and
it's tough because obviously there's no Holy Diver, no Rainbow in the Dark on this album, but you get We Rock, The Last in Line, I Speed at Night, One Night in the City, Evil Eyes, Mystery. I kind of think it's the better album top to bottom, but Dio's a legend. Can't go wrong either way.
Yeah, you wouldn't go wrong with either choice there. But, yeah, I think maybe that's a more well-rounded album beginning to end overall.
So for number 3, I went with probably my favorite solo artist as far as that goes, Marty Friedman. His 1996 Japanese release of this album, 1996's True Obsessions.
Mm-hmm.
Dude's obviously a legend. This was the first album of his I'd heard outside of Megadeth, so I really didn't know what to expect, and it just kind of blew my mind to how, like, it wasn't like Megadeth. Like, it wasn't all metal. Like, there were softer songs, there were just some straight up rock songs, there were just some really interesting instrumentals thrown in. Just kind of blew my mind, and really just the tip of the iceberg as far as his solo career goes, but just an outstanding album.
Yeah, you in 1996 or whenever you ended up picking that album up, that's a shock to the system. You in 2025, it's like, now that we all know what Marty Friedman's all about and how he's not just a guitar virtuoso, he's just a musical virtuoso.
Yeah.
And so now it's like, if he released an album like that now, it would just be par for the course for him. And again, I've said this before, we were fortunate enough to see him a couple years ago. Cannot stress enough that you need to go see him if he's on tour. Just blown away by his live show. He's still amazing. He's got so many amazing young musicians playing with him, touring the States. And he's a guy that when he decides he doesn't want to do it anymore is going to be a huge loss to the metal community.
Yeah, absolutely. I do have one honorable mention, and this was kind of because I wasn't sure whether this was a solo artist or a band. Wikipedia seems to think band, but when it's someone's name, how do you.
Yeah.
It is what it is. I went with Danzig's second album, 2, Lucifuge from 1990. Could have gone with the first one because it was really good. Had Twist of Cain, Not of This World, Am I Demon, Mother on it. But ended up going with the second one because Long Way Back from Hell is probably one of my favorite songs of his. You also have Snakes of Christ, I'm the One, Her Black Wings, 777. Dude had some really good early stuff. Definitely a fan, but whether he's a band or a solo artist, that's up to you.
Yeah, it's... whatever you want to say, those are both amazing albums, and you couldn't go wrong picking either one of those up. But good honorable mention pick for sure. I went with more the classic rock side. We've heard the rock and metal, and even had Taylor Swift in the chat. We'll find the happy medium with some classic rock. And this first one was the one that kind of spurred this question on. It was the 1989 release by Don Henley, The End of the Innocents. To me, this may be one of my favorite albums of any genre of all time. I don't think there's a bad song on this album. People know The End of the Innocents, The Last Worthless Evening, New York Minute, Heart of the Matter. Those are all amazing hits, but How Bad Do You Want It? I Will Not Go Quietly, which of course features Axl Rose, Shangri-La, Little Tin God, Give Me What You Got, If Dirt Were Dollars. You have guys like J.D. Souther involved in the writing process. Of course, Bruce Hornsby co-wrote The End of the Innocents, which when you hear it sounds like a Bruce Hornsby song, so not a big surprise there. His stuff, I love his solo stuff. Seeing him in concert, which would have probably been about the same time I saw Night Ranger in 2000, was an amazing show. And to me, this album is just so good.
Yeah, it is. Just top to bottom, a great album. It's amazing I didn't realize initially, and I've long since found this out. I didn't realize Axl Rose sang background vocals on I Will Not Go Quietly.
Yeah.
But now when you hear it, there's no way to not know that was him. Like, the dude has such a distinct voice. But yeah, I mean, just as far as just great songs, Last Worthless Evening, Heart of the Matter, just legendary. Just the dude is so talented.
Is Axl Rose maybe the most, I want to say misunderstood, but like, I feel like people don't know how important he has been to the music industry. I mean, we saw the video a few weeks ago on our podcast with him singing with Billy Joel, which he'll come up again in a minute. It's just like, this guy, I mean, we know what, his music and everything that goes with that, but I feel like some of the stuff he did away from his band, like, is stuff that maybe people don't understand, that he clearly was a guy that had lots of music influences as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe that might have been part of the issue with Guns N' Roses as a whole. Because when you think of kind of the Use Your Illusions 1 and 2, like, clearly he started wanting to incorporate the piano more into his stuff. I think in some way, like, he wanted to mold himself as another Don Henley or Billy Joel. I think that's just kind of the level he saw himself on. And not to say he's not, but I think that doesn't necessarily play into a hard rock band all that well, and that could just be one of the many reasons it took so many years for Chinese democracy to see the light of day.
Yeah, I think you're probably right there. Of course, born in Lafayette, Indiana, so that probably influenced a lot of his music sensibilities growing up as well. But yeah, obviously that album from Don Henley is one of my all-time favorites. This album, I love this album, but I think it's really more that it was the album that got me into Billy Joel, and that was Glass Houses from March 12th, 1980. I think this was one of the first albums I owned, and to me, it's a really good one. It's another one that has a lot of hits. I mean, that A-side, is you may be right, Sometimes a Fantasy, Don't Ask Me Why, It's Still Rock and Roll to Me, and All for Lena. I mean, those were all big hits. B-side, not as much, but I Don't Want to Be Alone, Sleeping with the Television On, Close to the Borderline, Through the Long Night, all really good songs. When you look at this album and you think about, for those who know Billy Joel, the song The Entertainer, which comes out in a few albums, where there's a segment in the song where he talks about, you have to make it fit, so we cut it down to 305, talking about the commercialism of radio airplay and having to take these long tracks and cut them down. And you look at this album and it's like almost all these songs are in that range. So like you could see something like this was maybe kind of the impetus for his frustration, but at the same time, it's a really good album.
Yeah, no doubt. And I would love to see a list of, if you were to poll like all hard rock and metal fans, like who are their favorite non-hard rock and non-metal artists are. I gotta think that Billy Joel shows up more often than not for people. There's just something respectable about his body of work.
Yeah.
Don Henley's another one. It's hard to not enjoy their stuff.
Two thoughts on that front, and one obviously not as good a thought. There has been a lot of talk about Billy Joel going through a lot of health issues. I saw he just sold his motorcycle shop because of a brain condition he's got. So hopefully whatever he's going through, he'll be able to get through that. But the other side to it, too, and this is what I've said for a long time, people talk about Bruce Springsteen the way I feel about Billy Joel. To me, they put Springsteen, I understand some of it's the political nature and things like that, but just from a musicianship standpoint, to me, I will take Billy Joel 10 days out of 10 over Bruce Springsteen. But that's just, I feel like people put Springsteen up there on this legendary level, and I feel like they overlook Billy Joel. But I think you're 100% on the mark. I think there are a lot of musicians from both the pop end of the spectrum all the way through the metal end of the spectrum that grew up listening to songs like the songs that are on Glass Houses and were inspired to really expand their horizons in music because of Billy Joel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. I don't understand the Springsteen thing. I've never really been a fan of his.
He's got a couple of good songs that I enjoy, but it's not, his music is, again, so much of it for me comes down to vocals, and his vocal style just doesn't really jive with me. I'm not saying the musicianship isn't great, but it is almost always going to come down to vocals for me, and I'll take Billy Joel hands down in a vocal contest. Another guy I like his vocals is Phil Collins, and the last pick of my three was his 1985 release, No Jacket Required. He's another guy that you could have made. There are a lot of different picks that could have been made, but to me, when you look at this one, you've got the hits, Sussudio, One More Night, Don't Lose My Number, which is kind of an underrated
great song.
Phil Collins song, Who Said I Would, Take Me Home, which wraps up the album. But you've also got Only You Know and I Know, Long, Long Way to Go, I Don't Want to Know, Inside Out, which is on the B-side. And, of course, if you get the bonus collection that came out many years later, you also get podcast favorite, Easy Lover, which, of course, was released on Phil Bailey's album at the time, so it was not on this release. It probably would have been, and they would have probably taken this album to a totally different stratosphere. But in the deluxe edition that came out in 2016, it does include Easy Lover, a live version from 1997, which is just an absolutely great song. But, yeah, thoughts on Phil Collins there?
I think I just have the standard edition of that. I have to go back and check.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's wild. I don't own a lot of albums by solo artists, but I definitely have the Don Henley and the Phil Collins albums. Both are classic.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of really good stuff there. And it's a little more on the classic rock side, but just some really good stuff. And again, of course, Chris is going to jump right into the lyrics of Easy Lover. There are a couple of songs from our days of working together that will probably never leave either one of our brains, and that is definitely one of them. But We want to know what your picks are. Let us know in the Discord. Tell us what your favorite 3 solo artist albums are. Let us know what your thoughts are. And of course, if you go back and listen to previous episodes of the Hard Rock Empire, we've had this question on for a few weeks, or different questions on at the end of every episode. Let us know what your picks are. We definitely want to know. So join us in the Discord, which is pinned at the top of chat. With that said, it is time to wrap up this edition of the Hard Rock Empire. Thank you so much for everybody tuning in. We had a great live crowd tonight. Really appreciate that. Whether you listen live, whether you listen on the VOD, we really appreciate you. Join the Discord again, as I said. We'll be having schedule updates in the Discord and all kinds of cool stuff there, so make sure you join us there as well. Big thanks to Chris for all of his efforts, continuing to get more people in to listen to the Hard Rock Empire, and of course his thoughts on the Power Trio as well. Big thanks to everyone who listened tonight and chatted. We really appreciate you. Thank you so much. Big thanks to Mike, as always, for his hard work on this podcast. And a big thanks to you whenever and wherever you have listened to us. And finally, big thanks to Stoveleg Media for their continued support of the podcast. We'll be back with you sometime next weekend for another episode of the Hard Rock Empire. Until then, don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.